Our political commentators are with us now, Dale Husband and Ben Thomas. Kia ora koroa.
Hey, kia ora Ben, kia ora Kathryn.
And let's crack into it then. Dale is a long-time broadcaster and radio wātea presenter hosting a Māori-focused current affairs program, or just a current affairs program. Ben Thomas is a former National Government Press Secretary, a columnist and a director of public affairs firm Capital. Thanks again, guys, for being with us at such a busy time. Last sitting week, the passing of the fast-track legislation looks like the main business, but a bit of a rush also to get through to Wednesday. Coming out this week, they're going to be hard to ignore the opening of the books, with speculation they're going to look a lot worse. Deficit's going to look worse. And of course, GDP stats are out, likely confirming what's been pretty much a 2.5 to 3 year recession, Ben Thomas. What's your take on the final week?
Well, it's been a really busy last few weeks in general. I think this might be a function of the quarterly plans. You sort of give 28 ministers their homework all due on the same day. And if you go back and you look at the bursts of urgency throughout the year, they've also coincided with the end of those quarterly reporting periods. And we've seen it, pretty much everywhere. Huge numbers of announcements. I think the other week I counted something like 14 government press releases on one day. Hugely busy in the House, although that's fallen back a little bit. The Crown Minerals Amendment Bill, and the Marine and Coastal Area Amendments seem to have sort of fallen back in urgency from even a couple of weeks ago for various reasons. But also, the big sort of fiscal update news and economic updates. And look, honestly, I think given the sort of interaction of some of the party leaders last week, the Prime Minister must be sort of tempted to say, actually, let's flag it and go home for the summer.
Dale, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, they're at it, aren't they? Urgency is a hallmark of this coalition government a year in. Cutting them some slack too. You've got to appreciate that we've been through some difficult times globally as well. So as we try and work our way through the financial situation here in NZ, there was always going to be difficulty. And when we do open those books, it'll be even perhaps more challenging next year, which is reasons for us to be nervous. Quite obviously, people are unimpressed by the fast-track legislation, how it has been rammed through government to be enacted into law, and still question marks over people's conflicts of interest, who in fact is headlining those tono to get opportunities to go and drill in all parts of our country. So there are still question marks very much on that. And I take your point, Ben. A lot of these announcements and legislative moves come in a barrage in this last week. But, to illustrate the difficulty, I've just come from where our little radio station is based, on a marae and Mangere in Auckland South. And we've got food parcel delivery today. So, for people who have never been on the bones of their you-know-what and have had to line up to get some assistance for their kids over Christmas, it's easy to avert your gaze. But when you're stuck right in the middle of it, it's really humbling, and a reminder that we've still got a hell of a long way to go as a nation to address the disparities and income gaps that exist in our community. So tough times maybe have been, but it feels as though tougher times are still ahead for 25.
Some of the bigger announcements of the last week, government announcing 3 new toll roads. Let's touch on that briefly. That would have been a pearl-clutching moment and, moment of outrage just a few short years ago, Ben. But in the context of needing to get this infrastructure moving, is there now greater tolerance?
I think there is. I think one of the top performers this year, since we've moved on from the year from the election and from the year from government forming to the year in review. One of the best performers I think the government's had is Chris Bishop, the infrastructure minister, who has, I think, really very clearly set a narrative in terms of what is happening and what he says needs to happen in the infrastructure space, and he's really laid the groundwork, in terms of the principled reasons why and the arguments for a greater reliance on user pays and different financing methods. Yes, to the extent where, as you say, what would have sort of been up in arms kind of moment, people like, well, good that we might get the roads built, So I think that's been a real success story for the government this year. And, that reliance on fees and levies was sort of flagged kind of before the election. But I think, the real meat on the bones, I guess, has been put in a pretty compelling narrative, I think. In terms of the fast track, I actually think that's another example where Bishop and, to a lesser extent Shane Jones, maybe in spite of Shane Jones, has sort of won the argument, really. At the beginning of the year, we saw possibly tens of thousands of people demonstrating around the country about the fast track. Now it's moving into its final stages and you're not really much of a peep. And I think part of that was the announcement of the projects that were selected, where, not only were there a bunch of iwi projects and, social sort of development projects, social housing, but mostly it was things that people are like, actually, we do need those and we've been dragging our feet for too long.
Is it one area, Dale, where they have, if not won an argument, certainly, put up a strong case that has seen that legislation right to the point now of passing? And as we said, people focus more on where is the stuff we need, given some still concerned about the environmental fast tracking.
Yeah, well, obviously it's the mining considerations, it's the use of conservation land, and it's the unknown quantity of where the shareholdings go to the companies that are coming in, and the scant detail about what sort of pūtea might end up in New Zealand's coffers when these international players come to town and start drilling all over town. Shane Jones knows that there's some political capital to be gained by being an advocate for that sector, and he's pretty comfortable being dismissive of any environmental, cultural or green-tinged opposition. And of course, just on the toll roads, well, anyone who's travelled through Sydney realised they're building tunnels everywhere and everything is tolled. You can take the long route, obviously, and I don't know if you're old enough to remember, go the toll gates, click, there, Ben. But that's the way that the Harbour Bridge started off too. So, look, if they're going to create highways that are going to save time and people want to use them, then so be it. I guess it's just another reflection of user pays, but the 3 tolled roads, no doubt, will be another decent addition to our highways and byways of the land.
Okay, perhaps the biggie last weekend. What's your take on the politics behind it? This big announcement on replacing the ferries. There was a deadline to make an announcement. The announcement was not of much. That some kind of new quasi-agency would be responsible for trying to procure them. And the bigger part of that, perhaps, and the mystery surrounding it, was the Minister for Rail, Winston Peters, not only being announced, but promptly coming out and saying we're back to the drawing board, although with a 3-month deadline. What the heck, Ben? What happened last week?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the stories of this year has been how well these 3 very quite divergent parties have worked together on their coalition agreements, and their sort of shared, if sometimes mutually overlapping and sometimes slightly contradictory agendas, almost sort of like 3 parallel worlds. The worlds collided on the ferry issue, which is, probably the first really big ticket issue where they haven't had the coalition agreements as a roadmap to guide them. Not promising. It seems like there was a real communication breakdown before the announcement. We heard the new Minister for Rail, Winston Peters, saying that he had only had 3 hours notice of the announcement, although if I recall correctly, it was he who set that announcement date that everyone else had to then race towards. But ACT clearly didn't get the memo about the indeterminate range of costings that wasn't certain, and they put some numbers in a press release. And the new minister himself said, well, this FAQ sheet is all very well and good, but I'm starting again as the minister. And I think ordinarily this government has been functioning pretty well at a kind of sub-leadership level.
The perception is that this was a humiliation of the finance minister, and where was the prime minister in mitigating it?
It was pretty extraordinary that a new minister was announced without the prime minister being there. Yeah, he's the person who hands out the portfolios. He makes these decisions.
He is quite good, Christopher Luxon, at keeping his hands off things that are going wrong.
I think he would say that he's a chief executive and he gets the right people in the right positions and then he leaves them to perform.
Yeah, your take on it all. What's gone on here, Dale?
Well, for mums and dads whose kids' school lunches have been cut, then the potential for us to lose huge money, big money, if we get the ferry situation wrong, is a slap in the face to all of those who have to endure the hardships that have been foisted upon them in order to save bucks. It's a slap in the face to the 10,000 PSA workers who've been marched down the road if we end up paying billions more for replacement ferries. Winston Peters isn't going to come out and tell us exactly what he's going to do. Of course not. He plays his cards pretty close to his chest, and we know that he prefers to have rail abilities for the new ferries. So
to be achieved in 3 months' time? These 200 metres ferries that will be, either or not rail enabled compared to rail compatible. Just announcing that we're going back to the drawing board. We've also seen the size of the blowout of the original IREX project magically now become $4 billion. I've not seen the numbers as to why that's happened.
4, 5, 6. Take your pick, Ben?
We're reports of an estimate of $900 million for the new ferries being on the back of the envelope. Plus, we don't know what the cancellation fee is for cancelling the other ones.
I do think the cancellation fee. I think the new minister said is not included in the estimates. That's not part of the budget, the estimates. So that has in the words.
So what? We just pretend it didn't happen.
in the words of that old skit, it's been towed outside the environment. It's.
Look, another issue, Dale, to come back to you, is that for Te Waipunamu, the South Island, this is a major, major issue. There's billions of dollars of freight that crosses. Yes, we're starting to see figures like it's only, 5% of total freight that crosses. But when you've got the likes of Main Freight saying this, this outcome will impact what happens with road haulage, logistics, timing, cost, it's got the potential to really, really hack off a lot of people if they don't get an outcome. And let's not forget the several serious safety incidents we've had with that existing fleet.
Yes, they're a bit clunky now, there's no doubt, but looking to attribute blame, I mean, we should have factored this in, a decade ago, and we haven't. And both this coalition government and the one previous have been guilty of sitting on their hands. So where to from now? It's a big ticket item. I recognise that Main Freight are making strong commentary, but they're still tracking pretty well as a business as well. How important we get this right? Well, we're in the safe hands of Winston Peters, it would seem. And so fear not, fellow Kiwis, all is well with Winnie at the helm.
Okay. Look, you talk about the relative cohesion they've managed despite a very sort of challenging project as the first three-party full coalition government. One wonders whether this is, and let's park it now till February, March, where everyone comes back and the focus comes back on politics, whether this is the start of things becoming a little less cohesive. When does the Deputy Prime Minister's role change to David Seymour?
May
Middle
31?
Of next year. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The public sector cuts keep coming, close to 10,000 in total by one measure RNZ uses. The Finance Minister's very quick to point out that figure includes vacant positions, positions that hadn't been filled and that she perceives sometimes that was for strategic reasons. More job losses in health, Dale. Again, is this seen as a government doing what it said it was going to do, or is it going to be perceived negatively in many quarters.
Well, cut, isn't it? People's jobs being severed. The PSA, for instance, we've still got issues. We don't know what the gender split is here for those who've been let go.
I think we do. It's did you say gender split?
Well, gender split,
it's
or
over
even
60%
ethnicity
female.
split.
Is the figure I've seen.
Well, and what's behind that? We've still got issues in our public service. But my concern is, it's the old adage, how to menui. What's the most important? It's people. So we send people down the road, and they take with them years of institutional knowledge and experience. So that's hard to compensate for. Sadly, all that experience is either employed in another sector or in reality, many of them taking their skill sets over to Australia to start a new life. So again, we get back to the decision regarding the ferry and how much potential loss we will be forced to endure if we don't get that right, as against the savings made by marching 10,000 people down the road.
The savings on the consultants' bill, I think the Finance Minister's going to hit her target on that. Again, are there going to be any tears shed anywhere other than downtown Wellington in the Beltway?
Well, no, and I think it's really more the headquarters in Auckland, for the consultancies, for those big guys. The other cost was contractors, where people were on what I think most people would regard as insane amounts of money to do really business as usual, sort of even graduate level work in government departments. And a lot of that was occasioned by, the public sector pay freeze, by, previous hiring freezes, things like that, where it was seen as easier to bring people in on contract as contractors on anything from $60 to $120, $125 an hour to do what you would, a salaried role on sort of about 40 or 50% of that would do. And that has, that created, I think, this crazy sort of bubble in the Wellington employment market, which is having to, settle. This is an ongoing challenge. There will be more cuts, but there will be more hirings, because when you take this really broad brush, cut 3%, cut 5%, whatever, it's not going to land equally. There are, agencies that are more efficient. There are units within agencies that are more efficient, that are doing more valuable work. But neither the minister nor even probably a chief executive, who has only been used to hiring people, actually knows where those efficiency savings are, particularly in that first year. So this will be an ongoing process of sort of readjustment.
The Privileges Committee will consider the MP's haka, the Te Pāti Māori-led haka in the House. Dale, your take on this? Is it any surprise that someone would seek to send it to the Privileges Committee?
No, not at all. But I'm just hoping that, in 2025, we can look at this one a little more carefully, because it's just part of the evolution of our nation, and quite obviously that's going to affect how it's run from the inside out as well. And let's face it, we've been forced to adopt a Westminster system that is now being challenged by a treaty partner who want their cultural norms being able to be expressed. They might talk about how it's inappropriate to advance on somebody, yes, but I don't think you can actually stop that haka from being performed. I think we'll see more of this coming into the House. So best that the Privileges Committee, Standing Orders Committee, get in the right sort of counsel, the right expertise and perspective, so they can make a decision that acknowledges the changing cultural dynamics in this country, and therefore that should be reflected in the inner sanctum of Parliament. So no longer is it to be tolerated that we are told how to behave, how to dress, when we can stand, what we can sing, or when we can haka. Our people on the move, and they'll just do it when the spirit hits them. And I think that we need to make room to accommodate that. I think decision-making forum.
I think that all of this would be a lot more believable from Te Pāti Māori if they weren't such snitches themselves. Debbie Ngāwiri Wapaka is always on Instagram showing off the latest letter that she's written to the Speaker, asking for Winston Peters to be disciplined because he said something in the House that she didn't like or made a joke that she just found distasteful. Te Pāti Māori's leadership are actually a couple of narcs who are pretending to be rebels in the House. I'll exclude Hana Ngāwhiti from that.
I think the millions of hits around the world probably answers their concerns about the level of concern they'd have about a Privileges Committee hearing, which is just another opportunity to make the same case. Okay, the recent polls aren't giving us a very clear picture. Some showing falls for National and Labour, some showing National and the left bloc, right bloc very, very close. Others a much bigger gap between the two biggest parties. Different movements for the smaller parties. So, yeah, an interesting round, and we'll wait for a bit more clarity. All of them showed, taken since the hikoi, all of them showed a big surge with the Pāti Māori Dale. We also know, I think there was something like 3,000 new registrations on the Māori roll since the hikoi. Can they sustain this beyond what was a huge public event?
Oh, it was massive too, and let us not kid ourselves for a moment that it didn't go global, but it reflected well on our country, I think, Ben. You know, the fact that we can have dissent, that we can have protest, but also respect each other's viewpoints. It was conducted brilliantly. It was the standout political move of the year. And as attention-seeking David thought that his treaty principles bill was the one to grab the millions of eyes and ears, it was actually the hikoi that superseded that in a great way. So, obviously, a bit of a rise for Te Pāti Māori. Everything's open to interpretation in these polls, early-ish in the political cycle. So, I guess in a way to be taken with a grain of salt. But let us not for a moment think that with the growth in the Māori population hitting 1 million, that there are many principled people, and as Willie said, the middle ground in New Zealand is changing in the way that they appreciate what the treaty offers them as well.
Yeah,
so 5% is good and growing.
Is this a threat to Labour, potentially to the Greens, but also to Labour as much as anybody else, isn't it, this Te Pāti Māori growth?
I think we still don't know how this is going to shake out, and whether the clamour over the Treaty Principles Bill, and if Te Pāti Māori can continue building that movement onto other things, Treaty Clause Review, Treaty of Waitangi Tribunal Review, local Māori seats that will be in referendum in October next year. So if they can keep the momentum going, because they have been the undoubted winners of this year politically, if they can keep the momentum going, hard to see what that does with National, whether the divisiveness hurts them with centrist voters, or whether being seen to be relying on Te Pāti Māori to form a government in the next election hurts Labour with centrist voters, and that's some crystal ball gazing.
Lots to play out in 2025. We'll do it all again then. Ngā mihi nui, thank you so much for all the time you've given us, both very, very busy people. Kia ora, and Meri kirihimeti to you.
Kathryn, you too, Ben. Have a good summer.
Have a
you
wonderful
too.
time with the
You too,
whānau.
Dale.
Thank you. Dale Husband, Ben Thomas.